Well, welcome everybody in today's meeting. We meet here in Bank, Ravel workspace, and together with Hodnot Pro, blockchain lab that is based here in Bank, organized the meeting. Today our guests came especially from London, from R3, and will introduce you Corda blockchain. And I will pass microphone to Wojtek from Hodnot, who will introduce guests, and I hope you learn today lots of new things.
Thank you. So, just for agenda, we start with general introduction of Corda, what's going on, the new developments and business information. Then we have two great business cases in trade finance and UK land registry. After we move we'll have virtual connection with Tom Manner from Asia Pacific, and he will give us a little bit of global scope on what solutions and business cases are developed on Corda on the other side of the world. And then we meet virtually as well Ante from University of St. Gallen. He conducted research, his PhD research study on measurement of impact of introducing blockchain solution on business processes. And I think it's going to be extremely interesting. And we finish with the Polish experience of JMMJ and global rollout of blockchain for media, which is not the POC or pilot anymore, but it's global solution that is acquiring clients all over the world. So, Joel?
Yes.
Please, the stage is yours.
Hi everyone, my name's Joel. I'm part of the R3 Corda team based in London. So I thought Wojtek, Piotr were crazy for doing a meetup at 9 AM on a Wednesday. We wouldn't do this in London, but it seems like a few people have turned up, which is good. So, all good sound-wise?
Well, we have state-of-the-art technology.
So I'm going to start by talking about Corda and just doing an introduction. Then me and Cais are going to go through some use cases. So we're actually going to look at something called the Corda Settler, which has been in the news recently. And there's one big limitation really of Bitcoin, and really only one big one, which is that the only thing you can do is cash. So Bitcoin is great if you're trying to transfer value to someone, but what about all the other use cases? What about legal contracts or trade finance or putting a house on the ledger or whatever it may be? You could do healthcare records, etc. These things don't happen on Bitcoin because Bitcoin is just a system for cash, as I'm sure you know. And all the blockchain revolution that's come since then has been an attempt to move from take kind of the innovation of Bitcoin in terms of allowing value to be, or allowing transactions to happen automatically, anonymously at a distance, and broaden it from just focusing on cash to focusing on all use cases, all transactions. And we can picture it a bit like this. So these are the old days before the internet, and every bank had its own kind of processing of the data, so everyone had their own databases. They had their own perception of that data, then they took actions based on that data, and they had to create kind of their own communication channels, faxes, letters, stuff like that. And it was all a very painful process, right? So if you're using faxes and everyone has their own database, it's very expensive to stay in sync. So if you're trying to transact something, it's a very slow, long process where you have to send out faxes, you have to have letters, you have to have auditors, you have to do internal checks that your databases are in sync. And then we have the world today. We've introduced the internet. And the internet is a protocol for everyone to agree on how to transfer information, right? Via websites, via email, via all kinds of systems. And it took a lot of the pain out of doing business because now everyone can agree that what the format is for data. We've moved from having fax machines and letters and meeting in cafes to just transferring this information automatically. The problem with the internet is it allows you to transfer information, but it doesn't allow you to transfer value, right? So you can't just send an email that sends someone $100, or you can't send an email that automatically signs a contract. We need a layer on top of the internet, which is transferring information. We need another layer on top of that, which will be a business layer, which will allow people to use the internet and have a layer on top to automatically transact, to automatically sign transactions, to automatically exchange a house for some cash, or to update their healthcare records, or whatever it may be. And we think blockchains are this layer. So after blockchains, you have a shared communication layer, but the processing of the data will be the same. The rules around how the data evolves will be the same. And therefore, everyone will have this same shared view of the data, and then everyone can just act on that data in the way they want. So it's incredibly beneficial because you get rid of all the difficulties around agreeing about what an asset looks like, around reaching agreements in deals. So even today, if you're selling a $100 million bond, then that's a very long process. You have to get lawyers involved, there's contracts, you have to sign all kinds of things. With blockchain, you can move to a world where there's defined rules for how bonds are issued, for how they're sold, for how you handle cash. And so all of that can go away, and you have this blockchain on which you can automate all your business processes. And that's what all blockchains really are trying to do. Does that make sense? Yeah. So in terms of the value unlocked by blockchain, so obviously that's in theory why it's valuable, but I wanted to back this up with some estimates. So here we have a number from Gartner from 2018 about the value unlocked by blockchain. So no one really knows what value unlocked by blockchain means. We need to contact Gartner at some point and ask them. But anyways, they said by 2025, the value of blockchain will be 176,000. Right, so I think that's $176 billion will be unlocked by blockchain by 2018. And this is Gartner, I assume they're well known here. It's one of those big kind of company ratings agencies. But maybe that's not enough, right? Maybe 176 billion isn't enough. So we also found this quote from the Royal Bank of Canada. Again, value unlocked by blockchain. And they estimate that to be 10,000, or $10 trillion to be unlocked in the future by blockchain. So we'll talk about why blockchains are valuable. We'll show you some use cases. But also remember that once upon a time, the Royal Bank of Canada went and said that this is a business opportunity worth $10 trillion. They don't come along very often. And so if you agree that blockchain is this valuable, then the difficult problem becomes choosing a blockchain. Right? So is anyone familiar with this blockchain? Did you guys see this before? It's Coinye. So it's like Bitcoin, but everything's Kanye West branded. So this is a vision of the coin, and there's various changes to the code to make it Kanye West themed. So this is one of the worst examples, but there's all kinds of blockchains and different coins out there, right? And so obviously there's Coinyes and Dogecoins, but there's also valid contenders like Ethereum's, there's Hyperledger Fabrics, there's Quorums, and they're all doing things slightly differently. And when you choose a blockchain, you've got to think carefully about what they offer in terms of privacy, in terms of speed, in terms of integration, in terms of ease of use. And the blockchain we've developed, and these are some of the struggles, actually, of traditional blockchains. So this is what we call blockchain 1.0. You might want to think about Ethereum, for example. And so these traditional Ethereum Quorum-style blockchains have a lot of problems. The first is the lack of identity. So that was very useful when it was just Bitcoin, which was about these anonymous cash transfers. But once you start to use blockchain for real-world projects, it becomes very important to link people, in some cases, to real-world identities. So if you're doing a $100 million transaction on the ledger, you often want to know who you're transacting with, and it's generally a legal requirement to do that, right? So a bank, for various legal reasons, can't just send $100 million to an anonymous party in exchange for an asset. right? Or if you're managing a healthcare record, you need to be somehow able to prove that you're either the patient or the doctor when you update it. And you need to know who you're transacting with. So one of the big things you need in kind of a next-gen blockchain for business is identities. You need the ability to know who you're transacting with for strategic and legal reasons. Just some background, actually, while we're talking about this. So R3 is now a company that's fully focused on Corda, a blockchain. But we started out as a lab for exploring blockchain technologies. And early on, we'd actually did a lot of projects on Ethereum. And we never planned to build a blockchain, and we thought we could just make a business model out of bringing banks together in a room, building Ethereum products, and just selling those Ethereum products to people. But when we started to use Ethereum for real business use cases, we started to run into these problems. No identities was a big one, but there was also more. So another one was the absence of privacy. So Bitcoin is private to some extent because everyone has an anonymous public key and you can't really tell who they are. There's various techniques you can use to try and work it out, but it's not easy. The reason these anonymous public keys work for Bitcoin is because every transaction looks the same, right? Every transaction is either 10 Bitcoin going somewhere, 20 Bitcoin, or 5 Bitcoin, or half a Bitcoin. And because all the transactions look the same, it's very hard to work out who's doing what. Once you move to other use cases, to traditional business use cases, then it actually becomes very important to have a layer of privacy, because if everyone sees the data, let's say you have a contract signed between two people, or someone has the ownership of an asset on the ledger, often you can tell by the details of that asset, by the details of that legal agreement, who that person must be. So if you go for the Bitcoin model of sharing all the data with everyone, things start to fall apart. And actually someone can go and look through the ledger and be like, well, all these houses are owned by the same public key, or this party who must be some kind of big bank has entered into an agreement to buy this company, stuff like that. And so once you have a general purpose blockchain that can model any type of asset, you really need more privacy than something like Ethereum can provide. Then we have the lack of speed. So Bitcoin is, the public network is maybe 5 transactions a second. Ethereum, 7 transactions a second. If we're going to put all business on a blockchain, on a single blockchain, then we're going to obviously need much higher speeds. And I'd say even Corda isn't there yet. We'll talk about it in a bit. But already we know that there's going to be more than 7 transactions a second required to replace all the business with a blockchain, right? So we need to think about how we can speed things up. And then the final one's just the lack of integration. So Bitcoin, Ethereum are kind of hobby projects, and someone's gone out and defined their own database layer, their own programming languages, their own compilers, their own message queues, everything. And they're actually throwing away a lot of the good technology that already exists in big organizations. So businesses expect to use standard message queues, they expect to use standard databases, like Oracle databases, SQL databases, they expect to use standard programming languages. And Bitcoin makes all of that very difficult, and you've got to relearn everything from scratch, and actually you end up building a lot of your own tools to ensure that messages are delivered, or that data is stored correctly, or that the data is queryable in some way. So our approach to these problems is Corda. So it's our blockchain. We built it from the start in collaboration with a bunch of members, which I'll show you later, for business. And these are some of the key features that Corda brings. The first is just consensus. And by consensus here, I just mean the ability of everyone on the network to agree on what was transacted, what was signed. Everyone agrees on the truth of the ledger. And so this is a basic property of blockchains. If you don't have that, you have nothing, right? Everyone needs to agree that if Alice sends Bob $100, then Alice no longer owns it and Bob owns it. And so obviously that's that basic property. But it layers a bunch of things on top of that. So one is strong identity. So everyone on the Corda network has a certificate proving who they are. Depending on the network, it can be different levels of KYC performed. But when you transact with someone, then HSBC can be sure, HSBC can be sure they transact with RBS, or Accenture can be sure they're transacting with Walmart and stuff like that. So whenever you, So whenever you transact, you know exactly who you're speaking to. That information isn't necessarily stored in the ledger, but you always know that when you enter into an agreement, you know exactly who you're talking to. And as we said, this is often required for legal and obviously for strategic reasons. Then we add a privacy layer. So we don't have that much time to go into it today. A lot of this Corda stuff would be a presentation in its own right. But in Corda, we move away from the Bitcoin model where every transaction is broadcast to everyone. And instead, we move to a model where transactions are just conducted peer-to-peer. So it's away from a model, kind of a broadcast model like Bitcoin has. Bitcoin has this gossip protocol where every transaction gets gossiped out to everyone on the network and everyone stores it. We move away from that to a model that's more like email. So in the Corda model, if Alice and Bob want to exchange $100 for $100,000 for a house, then they'll build that transaction just between them. They'll communicate over an encrypted channel like a TLS channel. They'll send the information back and forth. They'll both sign it and they'll get it committed to the ledger. But that information won't be broadcast out to the rest of the network. And as we said, I mean, this privacy is absolutely critical once you start looking at use cases around corporate mergers, healthcare, people's identities, people's university records, all kinds of things where you want to keep that information private. Actually, when you look at business use cases, there's very few use cases where you want to share information with everyone. And then we have speed. So we did a study recently with a company called DTCC, which is the US association that manages equity trading. And Corda was found to manage currently about 20,000 transactions a second. So that's much faster than what you're seeing on Ethereum today. It's not the end of the road. We want to continue improving that speed, but already we're seeing performance that's 100 times what you see on traditional blockchains. Yes, no. 10,000 times, no. Kind of between 1,000 and 10,000 times. Not 7 transactions a second, but 20,000 transactions a second. The reason we get this speed is actually because, as we said, transactions are just between individual parties. We're not broadcasting them out to the ledger. The reason Ethereum is slow, the reason Bitcoin is slow, is because in Ethereum or Bitcoin, you're constantly having to process other people's transactions because they keep sending them to you. So if you set up a node on the Bitcoin network, you're actually spending 99.9% of your time receiving and processing other people's transactions to check they're valid and put them in blocks or downloading the blocks, and actually only 0.1% of your time actually doing your own transactions. If you move away from that to a model where everyone's transacting point to point and you're only involved in the transactions you're involved in, it frees up a huge amount of CPU time. It frees up 99.9% of your CPU time to do more transactions. And that's the main reason we're seeing speeds of 20,000 transactions per second today. In terms of integration, we've just reused as much as possible what already exists. I think in the blockchain space, there's kind of a big not invented here phobia. There's a lot of hobby projects where people want to do everything themselves. But actually, we already have programming languages, so we just used Java, the language based off Java called Kotlin. We run the code on Java virtual machines instead of inventing our own compiler. The databases are standard SQL databases that are managed by other people. The message queues are standard message queues that are managed by other people. And essentially, by adopting the Java ecosystem instead of creating our own, we're able to automatically integrate with these databases, with these message queues, with the financial libraries perhaps your company has already created. And Corda at the end of the day is just a set of libraries actually in Java, and you import them like in a normal Java program. You just use those primitives to build blockchain applications. And then finally, it's open source. So that's just a property, I think, of all good blockchains today. So just because people are going to entrust their entire businesses to this, the code for how this is done needs to be open source and needs to be auditable. So I'll just skip over this because of time, just jump to a view of Corda's growth over the past year. So this, again, is a Gartner report. And they go and interview various companies and ask them what blockchains they're using. And in 2017, there was no reported use of Corda at all. The big red part is Ethereum, and then the next part is all the various hyperledger technologies, Indy, Fabric, etc. And Corda's nowhere to be seen. And then this is Corda in 2018. So obviously Ethereum's still big, Fabric's still a big deal, but you can see Corda here has risen up to take over 14.3% of all reported uses of blockchain in a single year. So and what we're seeing actually is people, not just new people coming to us on Corda, although we do see that, but people moving away from other technologies to start building on Corda. And in particular, moving away from Hyperledger Fabric to start building on Corda. So I mean, this is one example. So B3I is this reinsurance consortium that represents 50% of the world's reinsurance markets. They decided they'd been working on Fabric for about a year and a half, and they decided to move over to the Corda platform. Then this is Risk Block Alliance, another insurance alliance. They decided again to move away from Fabric and to move on to Corda. And then just yesterday, we announced as well, or they announced that Moneta Go, which is a US company that develops various blockchain applications, a lot around fraud, has also moved away from Hyperledger to Corda. They move away for different reasons. Part of it's the privacy model and the speed, but also a lot of it is just the ease of development. So I think people recognize that it's much easier to hire these Java developers, and actually you can be much more productive. All the tooling's already there, the databases are there, it fits into existing systems. And it's just a platform built for production use cases. So we have high availability support, firewall integration, database encryption, all the things you actually need to go from a POC, which is where a lot of blockchain projects seem to be trapped, and into real production. And so these are examples of some of the things, the projects that are in production. So Finastra's for syndicated lending, so lending in the financial markets. Science Cement Group uses us internally for procurement. Guild One is for oil royalties. Tradewind is for gold and silver trading. And then Guard Time is a project with EY and Maersk for marine hull insurance, so the insurance of cargo boats. And actually, I think some of the development team is based here in Warsaw. I'm sure they'll pop up again at Corda Warsaw Meetup 4. And all of these guys have just taken Corda technology and are actually using Corda in production as replacements for existing systems they have. So just to finish off, this is a view of our members. So remember I said we started out as a lab where people could explore blockchain technology. These were some of the people who helped us explore blockchain technology and helped us define what a production-ready blockchain would look like. As you can see, it was mainly banks at the time. We were a financial consortium, so INGs and the Citibanks and Barclays and Nordea and OP, etc. Anything Polish on here? I'm not sure. Anything you can spot that's Polish?
Commerzbank. You can see a lot of banks that are BLBL. I mean,
Yeah.
Marki,
Yeah.
I mean, all the Polish banks have been bought by some Java.
Yeah. But anyway, so these are the various banks that helped us. But this was our early days, and so they helped us shape the requirements. But actually today we rely even more on our partner network. So our partner network is all the people who are taking Corda the technology and putting it into the market. I don't believe I put Hopnell on there. They didn't fit in
top
the
left.
4 boxes. Yes, okay. Partner Solutions up here. That's Hopnell. They're hosting us today, obviously. And we break this up into our delivery partners. So these are consultants mainly who work with clients to help them build blockchain technologies using Corda. So Accenture's, EY's, the big companies. We have partner solutions. So these are actually much smaller. They're startups often who are created to start building on Corda. So Guild One is a startup that was created just to build a platform for oil royalties on Corda. TradeIX is a company that was created to do trade finance on Corda. They used to be on Fabric, but they moved over. HS Block is a company created to do healthcare on Corda, etc., etc. And so these are just, and then we have our infrastructure and technology partners down here. So Google Clouds, the Azures, etc. And various network service providers, so people providing information to the network. But it's effectively this group of partners working together that allow us, a relatively small company of maybe 250 employees, to actually push our technology into a much bigger space. It's an open source project, and what we see is the Accentures, the Microsofts, the TradeIXs and Guild Ones can take the technology and use it to build production-ready blockchain applications for their clients. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah.
Amazing slide where
Can you wait a second?
amazing slide where it's shown the scale of nets, different type of nets, interoperability. So
Yes.
amazing.
Yeah, of course, of course. So this is a slide I skipped over in the interest of time, but we can jump back.
Oh, thank you.
This one. So talking about it briefly, there's different types of ways of doing networks. There's the Ethereum vision, which is everyone's in a big interconnected network, and that's great. That's the right design. You want any one node on this network to be able to transact with any other node for any other reason. The problem with Ethereum is the problems we discussed around speed, around privacy, around network integration. Those are the problems. So they have this design of a global interoperable network, but it's just not production ready. And then we have the Fabric example here. And what we found from clients moving over from Fabric is that they've gone for what they call the channel model. So their approach to privacy is to break the blockchain up into loads of mini blockchains. So there'll be like a mini French land registry blockchain over here, and let's say UK blockchain land registry blockchain over here. And the problem, once you break these things up, obviously you have privacy because they're two separate networks, so they can't speak to each other. You achieve privacy very trivially, but you have problems. What if someone who has a UK property wants to exchange that property for a French property? Well, there's no way to speak across these networks. Either the people on the French property network have got to trust the people on the UK property network, or the UK property network's got to reveal the history of all transactions to prove they're valid, but that means you lose the privacy. So as soon as you try and transact between these kind of channels or mini blockchains, things fall apart. And then, you know, I think of Corda. I think it's got the right vision, the right design for enterprise. In Corda, everyone works on a single global interoperable network. As I said, transactions are point to point, so you achieve privacy that way using something similar to email, effectively, nothing we've invented ourselves. But it allows you to have these networks where the information can be kept private between the participants involved, but transactions can happen right across the network, and assets don't become trapped in certain networks. And a bit childishly, this is an email actually from Satoshi Nakamoto back to our lead engineer, Mike Hearn. So Mike Hearn is our lead engineer today. He used to email Satoshi a lot. Satoshi once transferred him 10,000 Bitcoins, but there was no one else on the network, so the only thing he could think to do was send them back to Satoshi. If you kept those today, they'd be worth billions, 200 billion they'd be worth today if you hadn't done that. But anyway, so I went back and looked through the email archives, and this is an email from Satoshi Nakamoto stating that the vision for blockchain is to only have one global chain. So we're happy we could respect that. So I'm actually going to do a demo next, so maybe we'll run through that demo, and we can take questions after that. So my demo will be a little bit less slick. I haven't done this too many times before, but let me just, oh no, okay. Give me one sec. So we're going to talk about two use cases today. I'll be talking about something called the Corda Settler for cross-chain payments, and then Cais will be doing a much prettier demo about this UK land registry project. So have people heard about the Corda Settler? No? Good. So it was kind of, well, I'll show you, it got a reasonable amount of coverage actually, and not from our usual supporters. But the idea of the Corda Settler is this. So today you have lots of different blockchains, but if you have cash on one blockchain, you can't use it to pay on another blockchain, and that's a big problem, right? So if you have Ether or Bitcoin, but you want to buy, let's say, a house registered on the Corda network, you've got no way of using that cash from the Bitcoin network, from the Ethereum network, to pay for the thing on the Corda network. And as we've seen an explosion of tokens across the past year, then this becomes more and more of a problem. All these tokens get stuck in silos on different platforms, and you can't actually use them to pay for things on the Corda network. So Corda Settler is just an attempt to solve this problem. And so we built this Corda Settler, and it's a platform that allows you to make payments on other public ledgers to pay for things on the Corda ledger. And the first integration we wrote was with XRP. So you can use XRP today to pay off debts on the Corda network. And that's what I'm going to demo to you today. And this got all the XRP people quite excited. So we announced it, new Corda app supports payments in XRP cryptocurrency. And then there was all kinds of big tweet activity based on it. And to this day, we have a whole bunch of kind of excited XRP followers kind of commenting on every single tweet we put out. So I'll show you this demo to you now, and then you guys can judge whether it's worth getting this excited about once I've finished. So again, the idea is just to allow a debt that's on Corda to be paid off on using XRP. So let me just put up a demo. I have a list of steps here as well, because I can't remember them all, so I'll just bring these up for you here. And I'll just run you through what we're going to do today. So we're going to start by creating XRP accounts for Party A and Party B. And then we're going to create a little test network of nodes. Then we're going to create an obligation as Party A. And then we're going to novate the obligation, so allow it to be paid off. Then B, we're going to say where to send the funds to. And then A will send the funds. And then we'll see that when they settle the obligation using the XRP account, it will update the two parties' XRP accounts. Today we're going to use test XRP accounts on the test Faucet network, but you could use this with the real XRP network. It's just a bit expensive to do it every time you do a demo. So, is there a chair? I'll just grab a chair from here. I think I can't bend down that long. Thank you. So the first thing we need to do is go out and create these test XRP accounts. So I'll just go to here. And here, this is just a test network, and I can generate a new account with 10,000 XRP. So you go, so those are my credentials. This is the first person, the address, the secret that's used for transferring, and the balance. And I'm going to have to just jump into the Corda. Actually, I can open up the Corda. No, I'll just do it here. Open up the Corda Settler folder. So you can actually download this code yourself if you like, and I can help you run it. I think it's at Corda Settler. So all the code is here, all the background, the usage, and all the kind of design thinking as well is available here. So if anyone wants to try this out at home, they're very welcome to use this as well. And so I'm going to open up my account, and I need to configure the node to use this account. So I'll go here, and I've got my XRP configuration file. Cool. So this is the account I used last time. So I'm just going to go here and grab the address I want to use. There you go. And my secret as well. So this is basically just telling the node where to go to, which account to use for XRP payments. And then I'm just going to go here, and I'm just going to create a bunch of nodes. These are just demo nodes we're going to use for this demo today. So I'm just creating a little network of nodes. And so this was one account. I'm going to create a second account for the other party. So this will be the account that money is paid to. So here we can see this is a separate account with another address, another secret, and another balance. So at the start of this demo, both parties have 10,000 XRP. And here I'm just creating a little network, Party A, Party B, and an Oracle node. Oracles exist in Ethereum as well, and they exist in Corda. They're basically parties that are trusted to provide some facts on the ledger. You might have an Oracle who provides exchange rates. You might have an Oracle who provides information about which companies are bankrupt. In our case, we're going to have an oracle that will be trusted to only allow the obligation to be settled on the Corda ledger if they observe the correct payment happening on the XRP ledger. And I'm just going to start my notes now. So obviously this is just a little bunch of local demo nodes. In the real world, everyone would have their own node that would be running in the cloud. They'd install the Corda Settler application and use that for real. And I said in my previous presentation, we're using existing technologies, and if you look through it a little bit, you can tell we're actually just using Java. So this is just a Java jar that we're running using the Java virtual machine. And here we can see we've got this Corda Settler app installed on this node and on all the other nodes. So I want to go look at Party A. So Party A has this Ripple app to allow it to pay in Ripple. It has the Corda Settler to allow it to do payments to other networks. We're going to be looking at XRP today and doing a demo with XRP Ripple, but in theory you could go and write other Settler rails as well. So you go and write one for Ethereum, for Bitcoin, for whatever other token you want. And so the next step here is to create an obligations Party A. So I'll put that in and I'll talk about it. We're going to interact here not with the UI, but with what's called the node shell, which is just an easy way to interact with the node. Corda is built around the concept of flows. So here we've defined a create obligation flow, and the operator of the node can execute that flow on their node, passing in these arguments, and that will automate the process of creating an obligation on the network. In the real world, obviously, you wouldn't create an obligation against yourself. This would be the outcome of some other business process, some trade you'd already done, but this is where the demo starts. So here we can see we create an obligation for $100. We're the obligor, so we're the person who has to pay, and the counterparty who will receive the money is Party B. This is the due date. This is in milliseconds. If you wanted to, you could pass in a more reasonable date time format. And then we're not going to be anonymous for today. But here we ran our flow, so we built a transaction, got it signed, etc. And the output is this obligation. It's currently unsettled. We haven't defined the payment method, and no payments have been made. So the next step is for Party A to specify what this settlement method will be. So here we're going to do this Party A again. Oh. So here I need to pass in the ID of the obligation. So I said it wasn't a very slick demo. Someone needs to write a UI for this, but it works. And so this is updating the thing. So previously, the debt had to be paid off in US dollars here, and $0 has been paid. We want instead, because it's a demo of this XRP settler, to update it so that the Party A owes Party B 20 XRP instead of $10. We here have decided on an exchange rate of a certain amount, but you could really define any exchange rate you want. But here we've updated the thing. So here you can see the FX rate is 2. That might be confirmed by some kind of oracle, or both parties might agree. So now we know that this is going to be paid off with XRP. And now Party B just needs to specify which account to pay it to. So here, if we look on Party B, we're going to run this flow. And so... Say again?
I think you forgot to modify the paste UUID.
Yeah, so that's going to be different every time, so I need to go grab that here. Thank you for looking out for me. So I've got it here, I'm grabbing that. So this is the obligation to be paid off. And then I also need to paste which account I want to pay to. So I need Party B's account, which is this one, I believe. Let me just check one thing, which is that I'm not transferring to the same account it came from. No, good. So now I'm going to also say this is the account where you want to pay Party B. There we go. So now I've updated it, so you can see we're updating the settlement method. We're saying which account to pay to. This is the obligation we're updating. The settlement method will be to pay this account using this XRP settlement method. Right, we're going to pay off in XRP. Again, that executes, and now we've consumed the old obligation and we've changed the obligation. It's still not settled. It's no payments to be made. We've said you need to pay this XRP address to pay off this debt. So now all we need to do is run this final flow, which will execute the payment on the Ripple network, and the obligation will be extinguished or destroyed on Corda. So let me give that a go. So finally, again, I'm going to need to paste the UUID here, but I need to just grab that here. There you go. And so I'm going to run this flow, and I can talk a bit more afterwards about what the flow is actually doing. Basically, we're going to run the off-ledger settlement obligation. We're going to settle this much XRP in XRP here, and we're going to be settling the obligation 073 blah blah blah. Yeah, maybe. Let me try that one more time.
Or maybe you should quote it.
Maybe. Let me see. One of those things that works at home, obviously. No, yeah, I think I might be missing a closing bracket.
Yeah.
Let me just go back to the Corda Settler README. So let me try this instead, which is the one from the official README. No, very odd. Do not pass the input string. What about P? I think, yeah, maybe it's going over the line. Let's try that.
I guess it's trying to find.
That's very odd.
Is this P07 defined somewhere else?
No, I don't think so. Let me see. I've got some other notes where I wrote this up before. How odd. I'm wondering. Let me just break it. I wonder if I've got a kind of a line break there. I think what's happening is I'm pasting it from the previous line where maybe it has the line break. Is that possible? Maybe not. Again, this is why you write UIs. Oh, there's a P in there, but there's not supposed to be a P in there. There we go. So user error. This is like, it's hard to use XRP. Corda's really easy, XRP is hard. But here we go. So now that has actually been paid off. So now you can see the thing has been settled. The settlement method was to pay this XRP address, which is party B, and the payment was this amount, and you can actually go and look at the hash of that Ripple transaction. So it doesn't look like much, but actually in practice what's happened is, to pay this off, we have gone out and we've, inside the flow, we've created an HTTP connection and we've submitted a payment to the XRP network. We've waited for XRP payment to complete, and then we've asked the settlement oracle, this trusted party, to confirm that that transaction has indeed happened on the XRP network for the correct amount to the correct account. And then the oracle signed, and everyone's agreed that the obligation is killed off. So party A has killed off the obligation on this network, but given party B 20 XRP on the XRP network. Okay, so I can go and look at that now, and I'm just going to put up this little thing here. And so if I go to a random, so basically this is just me sending a curl request to the testnet and asking about this account and how much is in it. So if I grab the account I had, then we should see and there you go. So it's not the prettiest thing, but here we can see that we've actually no longer got 10,000, but got 10,000 and this additional 2 here. And if we go and look at the account of the other guy, which we have here, so this was the address of the party who's done the paying, then we can go and update that and see that this transaction has happened. And you can see this guy's had his Ripple amount decreased by this much, plus some amount to make the transaction go through. So that's the demo. So very simple, very straightforward, but what it allows is using this Corda Settler technology to settle obligations on Corda, or buy assets on Corda, or finish trade deals on Corda using tokens from another network. And so we've integrated with Ripple. It's actually relatively easy to integrate with Ethereum, to integrate with Bitcoin. We can integrate with any token we want. But actually, and this is early days, but what we're thinking of next is, if you can integrate with Ripple and tokens, then in theory you can integrate with real world bank accounts, and then it starts becoming much more powerful. So if there's a way to check that a payment's gone through on a real world bank account or a real world banking network, then you can settle the agreement on the ledger. And then you don't need to worry about transferring all your value onto the ledger. You can just use Corda to manage the assets, to let them move around, and you can pay this off with real world money. And so recently we announced a trial integration with Swift, which is the huge interbanking network. I was asked to do a presentation on this, but there's really nothing I can say yet. We have a webinar coming up, so search for that, and it'll talk about what this looks like. But the idea is to go beyond just integrating with tokens and start integrating the settler with the real world. Thank you. Any questions on that? Yeah.
Yes. I have a question about the nodes. The nodes in Corda network. So
yes.
Can you give some examples? So if, for example, two parties like banks will be transferring value,
Yeah.
Who can be Oracle and notary?
Yeah, so it depends. So in the Swift case, it's a bit more obvious. You might imagine a Swift node would exist. In the case of a Ripple network, it depends. If there's some kind of network operator, they might provide that service as it's a two-way service. Or you might see that role either delegated to some existing trusted party like a Thomson Reuters who provides stuff like exchange rates as well. Or you might find that you need some kind of BFT notary, BFT oracle. So you're not just trusting one person, but a cluster of oracles have to agree that this is a transaction that's actually happened. And you might imagine a cluster of an oracle made up of one node from Accenture and one node from EY and one node from some bank, and they all agree that that transaction went through. That's so we can't really solve with the technology. That's more of a kind of a governance problem that individual integrations need to solve.
Okay, and one more, is that platform you showed us available for free for testing, or is it enterprise?
Yeah, so it's there online. So the code is available here. So that's very small, but it's github.com/Corda/Corda-Settler. That's a completely open repo. You can go and download that. And then the test network I was using is just a standard test network. So if you wanted, you could use the real network, then you have to create accounts and actually do real money payments. Or you can just go and very quickly create a fake account on here. Yeah.
One of the use cases for general use case for distributed ledger would be to replace payment systems, at least to provide the instant messaging across the whole globe and then rid of all intermediaries. Now you show us that Swift is going to test actually this technology.
Yeah.
But don't you think that Swift should cease to exist after?
It's possible. So we have a tokens team, and they're looking at various approaches. So one is to create native tokens on Corda. One is to, as we said with the Settler, to integrate with other tokens, and one is to use Swift. So it's just a piece of technology, so we're quite agnostic. We're happy for Swift to explore, allowing people to transfer money with Swift, and at the same time allow people to issue their own tokens, and kind of may the best man win. It's just a technology. So after that, it's business analysis of what would you be happy with, what's faster, but then do you want to use Swift because it's trusted, or do you want to try and not pay Swift and have something faster and use your own token? It's really up to the user. So the problems our partners have to deal with.
I've got one question. What exactly consists of a block in Corda? Like, you mentioned transactions are peer-to-peer, and that they are later somehow broadcasted to the node. So what is the node? What is the block in Corda, and how does the whole chain confirms my transaction?
So there's no concept of doing a broadcast. There's no need to form stuff into actual blocks. So there's no point at which you send all your transaction wrong because of the privacy implications. So Corda uses a different model. If we think of Bitcoin, why does Bitcoin need to broadcast blocks? Well, the only reason you broadcast blocks in Bitcoin is just to prevent double spends. That's why the broadcast happens, right? You send every transaction to everyone so that people will notice if the same coin is transferred twice. If you can get away from that, then you can have a completely private network. And so what we do in Corda is have this concept of notaries, and not necessarily enough time to explain just today, but the idea of a notary is it's some cluster of nodes, optionally Byzantine or running a high-performance algorithm, that just checks whether a given input has been spent before. And I can pull up some slides actually from a completely different deck what we'll be presenting tomorrow to give you a bit of a sense. It's hard to visualize, but if I go to, I believe I have a deck. Ooh, put this upside down. So sorry, it's a bit of a side thing, but. So you have these notary services that run as these pools of nodes here. They can run Byzantine fault tolerant, it's up to the individual notary pool. But they're not privacy breaking because you can uniquely identify the things being consumed by the transaction hash and the output index. So this is possible actually in Bitcoin as well if you want. So in Bitcoin, each transaction has a hash and you just say I want to consume output 2 of hash this. And because the hash is the thing that's been signed over, you can't change the hash after the transaction is completed. So the idea is instead of broadcasting every transaction to everyone, you instead just send the transaction hashes that you want to consume to this cluster of this pool of nodes who will check whether it's been spent before or not by checking in some distributed hash table.
Who is this nodes of notaries nodes? Like who is this third party trusted system?
Yeah, you can have, it depends on the use case. So in some cases when there's more trust, you might just have nodes running high-speed algorithms, something like Kafka, which Fabric uses, which might do 20,000 transactions a second. In other cases, you might want something BFT, and then that's governance, so you need to just go out and find those people. So you might have, as I said earlier, Accenture might be over here, and then EY might be here, and then this might be the US Fed, and this might be New York University, and they'd all be working together, and by using a Byzantine fault-tolerant consensus algorithm, if at least the two, if no more than a third are malicious, then you'll get valid consensus outputs.
But who decides? Like you said that it might be this, it might be that. Like
yes.
If I join Corda Network, who is going to be the network?
So Corda Network such case. So Corda Network is a big network that we've set up. In the case of Corda Network, that would be decided by the board that runs the Corda Network. So you have to go out and find these people and sign agreements. So it's all a bit nerdy, but if I bring up the Corda.network website, then we can look at the Corda network and its governance process. And so there's this network foundation, which is a non-profit, non-dividend paying board that will initially be made up of our 3 members plus the first 3 companies using the Corda network for production. Then over time, it will become a rotating board, and there'll be 11 seats. And it's a non-profit, but they'll just be making decisions around what kind of notary pools they set up, who are in these notary pools to provide trust. And then these people will most likely sign, SLAs, like service level agreements, to agree to provide good notary services, to legally be obliged to provide valid outcomes. It's a very dangerous game to be a malicious notary because people know who you are. You sign some agreements, so effectively you're breaking the law if you keep disagreeing with the rest of the cluster. And in particular, there's this notary consideration section which you can take a look at, which talks about the various considerations for choosing the notaries. Yeah, no problem.
Okay.
Yes.
I need to interrupt a little bit because Cais is already excited to jump and give his speech. So thank you very much for your questions. Joel is still around during the coffee break. Anybody who wants to have a one-to-one chat with him. So now we will switch to the UK Land Registry real project based on Corda. So transfer assets, managing all the properties in one reliable network. And Cais will do it for you. And after Cais' presentations, we'll have a
we have a 10 minutes break, and then we connect with Ante from University of St. Gallen.
Okay.
And now we have UK registry, so it's super interesting project. Hi. That's his Facebook photo.
The real picture. Yeah?
Sorry, I just need a sec to configure this correctly.
It's all recorded, so whatever you've been showing in the emails.
Yes, she always makes an appearance. Okay, almost there. Even the emails. That's okay. It's part of the presentation. Okay. Hi everyone. My name's Cais. I'm actually going to start this off with a quick video. It's like a minute long, but I think it sets the scene pretty well. So let's just hope I've got sound as well. Let's see if there's sound. Ever wonder? Yes, there is. Does anyone know how to make it full screen?
Yeah, just next to the Vimeo there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, okay. There's others.
Okay.
How much all the property in the world is worth? $220 trillion. But the world has a problem. It's slow, complex, confusing, and expensive to buy and sell property. With even a single sale requiring the buyer, seller, multiple businesses, and government departments to exchange tons of emails, PDFs, documents, cash, proof of address, ownership, and identity. Not once, but many times amongst each other. The Instant Property Network is fixing this with our global property marketplace, built on Corda Enterprise Distributed Ledger Platform. The Instant Property Network enables all businesses involved in the property buy-sell process to transact directly and join up their systems to build new, innovative services centered around their shared customers, making frustrated customers delighted customers. At the center of the Instant Property Network is the Smart Property Record, a unique digital record for the property. The record is created at the start of the process and then shared amongst participants in the network. You can consume information from the record, update the record, or attest to the accuracy of the record. Based on the single source of verified truth, participants can issue a mortgage, insurance, sales offer, or contracts direct on the network, safe in the knowledge that the instant settlement smart contract process will ensure cash, property title, tax, mortgages, insurance, and fees all instantaneously swap on the agreed completion date. The instant property revolution, powered by Corda, has started. Visit instantpropertynetwork.com to subscribe to the alpha release, available Q1 2019.
Thanks. That's the end of my presentation. Any questions? Okay. I find the voice of that guy really annoying. Did anyone else? Yeah. Not just me. So I recently just bought a house as well, and yeah, it's just a horrible process. I think so. I had to make when we found the house we wanted, we had to make an offer with the estate agent. The estate agent then goes and communicates that with the seller. The seller kind of comes back with a counter offer, and then they accept. And I hire a solicitor. Then I sort of talk to a mortgage broker. The mortgage broker talks to the bank. Bank gets back to the mortgage broker. My solicitor talks to the seller's solicitor. All these searches tend to happen. Sometimes I ask a question to the estate agent. Says no, you need to ask that to the solicitor, and vice versa. Someone talks to the land registry. I don't know who. And my solicitor then talks back to the bank talks to someone else, and it's just this nightmare of things, and it's kind of really hard to know where anything is at any point in the process. And I think that's where sort of this idea came from. Let's build this instant property network. So this instant property network is built by a consultancy called Blockchain Digital, and they did the work for the land registry project. So a similar project. The actual demo I'm doing is not the land registry's version, but rather it's Blockchain Digital's commercial version, something that you guys can all sort of get involved in. Before I move on, let me just show you. So this is the R3 Marketplace. The R3 Marketplace lists all the current Corda projects and Corda apps available. I think Hobnob are on there as well. But if you sort of check out the Instant Property Network website on here, see their mission goal. I think it's awesome. It's imagine a world in which property assets could be traded domestically and even globally in days, not months. A world in which it is as easy and secure to buy a property online as it is to order goods from Amazon. So if any of you guys sort of fall into any of these brackets, if you're a conveyancer or in insurance or tax or a bank, please do check out this website, and you can register for the trial. I think you just sort of register interest, and then someone gets in touch with you, and then suddenly you can become part of this trial. And the trial is actually ongoing right now. So I've got two screens loaded. I've got one which is this one up here, and these nodes are actual live nodes that are being used for this trial right now. So if I was to click estate agent, I'd access a node where there are real estate agents all participating in this trial, interacting with this node and sort of creating smart property records. And then likewise, there's conveyancers on here, banks, insurance, so it's pretty exciting. So I think that was estate agent. So I'll just log in to this node just to show you, and then what I'm going to do is just fall back to a test node for the purpose of the demo. This is kind of what it looks like, and you can see people have sort of started creating smart property records on here, and it's pretty awesome. But yeah, I'm going to fall back to this test network, and we'll sort of proceed the demo from here. And please stop me as I go through this if you have any questions. If they're general Corda questions or whether they're directly related to this, it'd be cool to keep this interactive. Actually, that was the wrong one. I think it's this one. Oh, the reason I had the emails up, there was a reason. It was, so this is like, in the process of buying this, it's just, it's just, right, this is the latest email from the solicitor. It's, what does he say? We shouldn't need anything further from you. We're now just waiting on a mortgage advance from Metro Bank, and I'll keep you updated. There's just no transparency. I have no idea what a mortgage advance even is. But and this was just emails between me and my solicitor mainly. It's like 41 of them, and it's just such a nightmare buying a house. I don't know what it's like in Poland. Maybe in Poland it's really easy. Is it easy in Poland? It is. It's different. In what way?
In the way of the procedure, but actually, because you need to do more things by yourself.
You need to do more things by yourself?
Yes, you don't hire solicitors. You just hire real estate agents. This for one.
So the real estate agent kind of does everything?
Yes.
Okay.
Almost, and you need to directly speak to the bank as well.
Right, yeah.
And sometimes you also need the seller by yourself.
Okay, what about the searches?
They do legal searches.
The estate agent does. But
Yes.
again, that's probably like an external agency doing that?
Pardon?
That's probably an external agency that they hire to do the searches?
They sometimes, I think in most cases, they do it by themselves.
Okay.
Which makes this process,
Yeah, okay. So you guys
a
don't
bit
really need
different,
this then?
But yes, this is nightmare, but it looks a bit different.
Right, okay.
Why?
Okay, right, so let's kick this off, and hopefully, even though it sounds like it's a bit more smoother in Poland, hopefully there is something to gain from this. So like the video was kind of saying, the way this works is built upon this idea of a smart property record. And the smart property record basically contains all the information required about a particular property. So all the particular actors in this, so these are the actors, there's an estate agent, a mortgage lender, a land registry, 2 conveyancers, a search agency, an insurance firm, tax office, various other things. Everyone basically reads or contributes or attests to data on the smart property record. So everything's sort of condensed down into this one record that all the participants have an overview of. Yeah? And that way everyone's kept perfectly in sync because, if blockchain promises anything, it's the promise that you see what I see. Yeah? So we can do that. So we can hit select template, and we'll do smart property record UK. So again, this is kind of specific to the UK market. You can imagine building templates around the requirements for various other markets. So the owner I'll just add as Corda case. The address can be 123 Street. No improvements, and we'll put an asking price in. So you can think of this as a seller going out, talking to an estate agent, and then the estate agent beginning the process of pushing this thing onto Ledger. Or perhaps in the future, in a world where everyone has a node, you can imagine this being kicked off by the seller themselves. So we'll just put in 100k, which in London will not buy you nothing. No open garage. And then, because it's a test network, there's just one bank. But if I was to go over to the Corda trial, you'd see there's actually quite a few banks already registered. So I'd be able to select a real bank and have them interact back with me. So I just select bank, land registry, and there's just one. It's a bit boring in that respect. And we can just select this sort of default package of searches, settlement org. Okay. And now I'll hit create. And what that will do is kind of like what John was saying, it will create a flow, and that flow will create this smart property record which exists as a state on Corda. It will have contractuals governing it, and it will be shared on a need-to-know basis. So perhaps at this point in the progress of the property, not everyone needs to know. The tax office certainly don't need to know right now because it's just an offer, and it's just someone's putting their house up for sale. So as and when you need to know, you get to know. What I really like is this sort of swim lane, almost, that shows you exactly what we are in the process. So we know that the estate agent has completed their bits. We know that there's all these other bits due to start, but the next bit is the bank, right? The bank needs to sort of provide some funding for this. So again, here it's just because it's running in a test environment, I'm just switching roles from this drop down. But in the real Corda trial, you'd have your own GUI and you'd have your own sort of access. So if you're the estate agent, you'd only see estate agent stuff and so forth. So I think now if I go to mortgage lender, and we can see this pending box, and we can do create approval in principle in again. So we can just select template. this approval in principle template, and then we can start putting in some of the details. So the buyer's name could be Corda Joel, and they sort of approve some amounts, so perhaps it's just 70k and the rest has to come from a deposit. They can add the expiry date to this. Let's see if I can access that. So, somewhere in March. And then various bits, and then we can hit create here too. So again, similar to Joel's demo, you know, this is running on normal Corda nodes, which is running on Java processes, and all these nodes are just hosted in the cloud as opposed to running locally on my laptop. I think the way they deployed this is via Docker. And then they built this GUI on top. This GUI would be running on a web server somewhere else. It's just built in Angular. And that's kind of, you know, that's the pattern people follow. So now we can sort of see, again, where we are. We're kind of down here. And we can see that the next bit is for the, I think it's for the offer to be accepted. So we need to go back to the estate agent, and it's kind of on them to do something, which is create the offer. And again, select a template. And that all looks good. And I think I have to put in the right address at 123 Street. Oh, actually, no, I think that's the buyer's address. So maybe he's lives on 124 Street. And then mortgage approval principle, yes. And then you can sort of see how, you know, you don't have to send out these physical documents, because I guess we're sort of looking forward to a world where, you know, when you sign with your private key and you're on Corda and you're a well-known identity, your digital signature is all that you really need. You can hit create here, I think, or maybe not. Huh?
You forgot something?
Exactly. There it is, the offer price. So, I don't know, 60k? Oh, that's too much. 60k, yeah. Your attention to detail is incredible.
One thing, think and check everything before you click, otherwise you may mess up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So again, back here, and then we can sort of see, you know, these other steps. So I'm actually not going to run through this whole demo, because it ends up just being like this whole process of just sort of filling out forms, and it just it's not great to watch. I might just do one more, if I can, just do one more step. But hopefully this guide gives you guys sort of like a flavour of how this works. So we can create this memorandum of sale. So again, this might be something that happens in the Polish market. I don't know. But so what these guys are trying to do is they're trying to sort of not reinvent the wheel. They're trying to take today's process and just move it onto blockchain. You know, I guess the question they probably get asked a lot is, do we still need all these steps? Do we still need all these participants? Surely if we had a blockchain solution, we can get rid of them. Like you were saying, we should just get rid of Swift, right? Because, but it's, I don't know. I have mixed feelings towards that. I often sort of, you know, when we go to hackathons and various other events, and there's like the big crypto crowd, you often find that's what they want. They want to replace entire ecosystems immediately. They're not kind of driven by, you know, a profit motive. It's just we're going to go in and we're going to be the next Amazon because we're decentralized. No, you're not. And so it's kind of that thing. So it's like kind of taking baby steps. So it's sort of, you know, bringing together everyone that currently works in property and just pushing the solution to blockchain, just so everyone has transparency, everyone's perfectly in sync, and you know, you can bring the process down from 3 months or whatever it is to 3 days. Actually, just check this again. I think, yeah, I think like for our house, we started this process in October, and it's still not completed. So it's just, yeah, it really was back in October. So it's, yeah, it's just crazy how the world works today, at least in the UK. So yeah, we can sort of go on, create the memorandum of sale and so forth, add various bits, and again, add an estimated completion date. So I guess here you'd probably do 3 days or something, as opposed to April. and so on and so forth. And okay, there we go. So I don't think I'll do too much more of this because it's just tedious. It's just everyone sort of switching roles and going and creating new forms. But if you're interested in doing this for real and seeing this for real, yeah, just join the Corda trial. Be a great way to sort of gain exposure to this sort of thing. And like Joel was saying, because this is Corda, because these nodes are part of a global network, what we could do is we could then take this house and we could have another Corda, something that tokenizes a house. We could then, once we tokenize a house, split it up, perhaps split it up amongst family members, sell off portions of our house. We could reach into another network, perhaps some sort of loan network, and we could use our house as collateral. We could swap ownership of our house with a node in a completely different network. It kind of just opens up almost infinite possibilities once you have this sort of stuff on Ledger. So I guess I'll leave this here and maybe open up for questions, if there are any. Yeah.
Could you explain what is the role of Corda in this specific solution? Like, it could be well enough, like standard centralized system.
Yeah.
And what is what Corda puts in, and who runs the nodes in this solution?
So, okay, I'll start backwards. So in this solution, the nodes are run by each of these individual actors. So the estate agent will have a node, solicitors will have a node, the tax office will have a node, the search agency will have a node. Everyone will have a node.
Do they have to run a node, or is it optional?
That's a good question. Whether they have to, I think it's. They don't have to run a node. We are doing some work around that. We're doing some work around sort of multi-tenancy of nodes. So it may be the case you have a service provider run a node and you have an account with them, and then you don't really need a node. But then it's always that balance between, if you're not running your nodes, is it really decentralized? Because in theory, everyone would love to sort of offload, the work of having to run a node to, say, Amazon Web Service or something like that. Then Amazon Web Service could run every Corda node. But it's kind of that question of is that the future you want, or do you want these things to be completely decentralized? I don't know. But given it's a JVM process, you can run it wherever you want. You can host it in the cloud yourself. We had a hackathon last weekend, I think, the weekend before that, and we've got Corda nodes running on Raspberry Pis to sort of mimic a point-of-sale system, and that was pretty cool. So, they kind of run anywhere.
But even if I run a node, what do I really get from this? Like, what Corda brings into me? What do I have, what I don't have in a standard centralized system?
So it's always, it's a good question. It's like, if you take trade finance, for example, or this, it's the case that this currently isn't digital. The process is very manual. It involves a lot of bits of paper being sent out, lots of emails being sent out, and trade finance is the same. It involves, bills of lading being sent in the post and so forth. So it becomes a question of, well, if we're going to make this a digital system, right? If we're going to move towards a digital ledger, then, well, it's definitely moving towards a digital ledger. It can't sort of remain as it is now. So the question becomes, as it's going to a digital ledger, do we want it to be a centralized digital ledger or a decentralized digital ledger? And if we say, a centralized digital ledger, then all these questions sort of arise as to who's going to run it, how much is it going to cost, what are the rules, and it just becomes really hard to get people to agree. It's why probably there is no digital ledger at the moment in trade finance, because it involves sort of trade across borders and legislation difficulties, and it's just impossible to get everyone to agree on a database, right? And that's kind of what blockchain solves. So in this respect here, it's just the case that it's not digital at the moment, and it will be, and building it on blockchain just sort of gives you all the added benefits of having smart contracts govern how the data is allowed to evolve. I often think, for me personally, I used to work at UBS, and we would have loved to have had a system like Corda. We tried building a system like Corda, and it just never sort of really came to be. And that's just because you have this sort of powerful flow framework that allows you to do sort of all these workflows in a way that you don't have to worry about concurrency or messaging or disaster recovery, all this sort of stuff. And even if you sort of take away the whole blockchain element of Corda, just Corda on its own as a product is incredibly powerful for building these types of solutions really rapidly. I think the amount of time it took these guys to build this, it was just, I don't know if it's on my head, but it was incredibly rapid versus sort of sitting down and building this sort of thing from scratch. That was a very convoluted answer right now. Yeah. Okay.
I worked for the real estate business 10 years ago, but to me it seems that the system should be propped by real estate agents to facilitate the business for them. And it makes sense when it's fueled with data from the state authorities, because then it makes sense to build a history of the property.
Yeah.
To not process due diligence for a long time, just to have it in one place, verified by different people.
Yes.
To update it, and then it makes sense. But it's a lot of work for real estate agents actually to build a history for the housing communities, to put up some things about taxes, about so in that when a lot of people work on this, it makes sense. But
yes.
There must be investment from the real estate agents, I think.
Yeah, I agreed with you. So all these sort of things, and you'd see this across the board with most of the Corda projects, they all require consortiums to come together and work together. One or two people having this sort of solution does nothing. So with the Marco Polo project around trade finance, again, it's a huge consortium. I think it's the largest blockchain consortium ever brought together. So similar to this, the Corda trials are meant to sort of stimulate the beginning of a consortium coming together to all work on this together, sort of put all that data. And I like the idea about the, once you gather all this data about a property and you have the relevant authorities attest to it, you no longer need to go out and perform additional searches each time, because you already have it in one place attached to one record, and you just sort of move that record along.
This is the most consuming.
It is the most consuming,
yes.
But once it's done for a property, it kind of lives on with that property.
That's the profit for the agencies.
Yeah, and it is. And so the problem with estate agencies in the UK is they're becoming redundant. I don't know what it's like in Poland, but they don't really have much value anymore. All they do is show people around, and they just sort of like move bits of paper around or send out emails. They don't do anything else in the UK, and they're sort of being replaced by online agencies. So maybe this is a way for them to sort of become relevant again, at least in the UK.
That's similar in Poland, I think, but to get rid of the agencies is very hard.
Yes.
They're quite well established.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why with this solution, that it is trying to bring everyone together. It's not trying to sort of exclude parties and say you're no longer relevant. Otherwise you sort of meet resistance and these things don't get off the ground.
Hi, what's your vision of keeping private information inside the ledger? I mean, it's against the law in Poland to keep information in blockchain.
Yeah.
So where do you want to keep it?
So the thing is, Corda is different because if you think about, say, Ethereum, where everyone stores everything, then that's a problem. Once you've got private data on Ethereum, you can never get rid of it unless there's a fork, and even then you won't be able to get people to delete that data. But like Joel was kind of explaining in Corda, because it's point to point, your private data will never be distributed to everyone. It will only be distributed on a need-to-know basis. But then I guess the question is, if you wanted to get your data removed, how would you do that? I don't know how you do that. What you could do is you could work with the nodes. Remember, Corda's kind of designed for enterprise, right? It's not sort of just random people joining the network and doing stuff. So, if they had some sort of process in place where you could reach out to them and say, I want my data deleted, then maybe they can roll back that data. They can agree amongst the nodes that have this and remove it. There isn't sort of, I know that you'd say, well, that kind of defeats the purpose of blockchain, but then, where's the middle ground, I guess? There's no real answer to that.
All right. I mean, you can keep hashes only in the blockchain.
Yeah, but I think someone here was doing something similar. Is that something that's been done in Poland at the moment, where you're keeping hashes of particular data on a blockchain? Is there some famous project or something? Because I'm not sure really what that.
There are a few firms working on Hyperledger Fabric, and
right.
they are still working on it. So.
Okay, but But I mean, you could sort of say, yeah, let's just store hashes, but that doesn't really fulfill this grand vision of having assets move freely, having, being able to sort of have a house on ledger, tokenize that house, do interesting things, use that house as collateral. Just storing hashes just doesn't seem very visionary.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Now we have a short break, and Ante, who will join us via WebEx, will discuss the use cases, or how to qualify the use cases for particular type of the blockchain or distributed ledger, how to choose the best one, and he's. So Ante will discuss the use cases, how to select them for which type of the blockchain or distributed ledger. We'll connect him via WebEx, and he's actually doing his PhD on this particular subject. So he has done quite a long research and academic work on that. So we will connect to him in 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yes.
Or 7.
5 minutes.
So if you need very short break, you're free to have it, and be back with us in 5 minutes. Thank you.
That's for you. Thank you. Thank you, Wojciech.
Thank you. Master of disaster.
Sorry. Sorry, let me, sorry.
Sir.
So we'll start, Ante. So let me introduce you a little bit. Ante did a little before a little bit, but Ante will tell us about the business potential, different ledgers and why to use Hyperledger, why to use Corda for different business challenges and situations. He will tell us how to measure the business, the impact on the business processes. And we're very, very happy to have you here. Okay, we're trying to get everyone, but they're having a coffee. They will join us now. Because then we'll have another guest from Hong Kong. So let's start. They will come. Ante, the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. As I said, I'm now at the University of St. Gallen trying to measure business impact of DLT and blockchain, because so far when organizations try to implement blockchain, they do it because they heard in the news that this use case makes sense or the other use case makes sense, but there's not a real structured way of analyzing what process makes sense to use blockchain on, and also how to measure the impact blockchain has on some processes. And I mean, I only have 15 minutes, so I'll give you some brief recap about my work and what I found out so far. But afterwards, we might have a quick Q&A session as well. So first of all, what I tried to do is to compare blockchain and DLT, because some say that blockchain is a distributed ledger technology, some say it's a synonym, some say they are different. And with the work, I first want to find out what is blockchain and what is DLT. So first of all, both have a P2P network. So they have a network like the internet where people can send transactions and receive transactions. But besides that, there's also some kind of consensus mechanism. So you can only send transactions, like in the internet. You can also validate those transactions. And finally, and ultimately, after validating those transactions, you can also store them somewhere. Now, when we look at blockchain on the left part on the bottom, it's a specific data structure. So you can really say that blockchain is a specific subtype of DLT, because the blockchain data structure is mainly used for public use cases, for permissionless use cases, where every single node in a network sees the same information. But on the other hand, you can also use a DLT without a blockchain. So for instance, Corda is using a directed acyclic graph. There are other kind of data structures, but as soon as you have a P2P network, a consensus mechanism, and some kind of data structure, you talk about DLT. And as I said, when you have a blockchain data structure, then we talk about blockchain. And now I'll tell you something about where the real difference is, because what then is I try to look at what kind of DLT protocols are there, which can also depict smart contracts, or which kind of DLT protocols can I use in business. And I found out that there are two big archetypes. So you have one, the ledger-based DLTs, something like Ethereum or EOS or Cardano. And the big characteristics of those ledger-based DLTs is that all data are shared across all nodes. So let's assume we have 5 transactions. You can see it here on the right-hand side. On the ledger-based systems, every single part has all the transactions. So when you have Ethereum, for instance, everybody can see everything what's happening on the Ethereum blockchain. Now, when you use the transaction-based DLTs, something like IBM Fabric or Corda, it's the fact that specific transactions can be allocated to specific nodes. And it's a big difference, because when we have now an enterprise context blockchain where we want to exchange sensitive information, we want to be compliant, then we cannot really store those sensitive information on a public blockchain, because then everybody can see my contract information, my master data information, and I want this to be secured somehow. So this is why I need a transaction-based DLT where only specific nodes, like the bank, like the customer, only get the information. And in this case, I can also, as I said, include sensitive information, like master data, like information about contracts, etc. And when we look at the taxonomy, those ledger-based systems have different characteristics. So they have a public access usually, the validation is permissionless, so everybody can validate transactions. The data distribution is full, so all data are shared across all nodes. And usually, as I said, you use a blockchain data structure for this kind of information. And on the other hand, for this private or enterprise blockchain types, you have a private access, you have permission validation, You have a selective data distribution so that you are compliant, that you can also use DLTs to also really include sensitive data and real contracts, and not just parts of a contract you store on a public blockchain. And this is kind of the differentiation I had between the ledger-based DLT and also the transaction-based DLT. Now, when we look at the properties, they are kind of all the same. So when we talk about DLT or blockchain, they all have the same properties. So a transaction is distributed, a transaction is transparent, a transaction is immutable and traceable. And if you are able to depict smart contracts or implement smart contracts, then you have also these programmable properties. Now, the difference is now on what level those properties apply. So on the ledger-based DLT, like Ethereum, those properties apply to the whole ledger. So all transactions are distributed across all nodes. The transactions are transparent for every single node in the network. Whereas on transaction-based systems, when you only have a transaction, you can say, okay, I have a transaction which is maybe a smart contract, which depicts a contract, a bank contract, and I want only the regulator, the bank, and the customer to see this. So within this case, in transaction-based systems, it's also distributed, transparent, and immutable, but only across those three nodes, and not across every single node in the network. That's the biggest difference. And then I try to look at what kind of capabilities are being commodified by blockchain. So when you look at the bank, for instance, you have three main capabilities you need for a bank. For the first one is transfer of ownership. So you have transfer of ownership in a bank for money, you have transfer of ownership for securities, and this is being commodified by the blockchain. So the blockchain can also depict the transfer of ownership. The other capability banks are heavily using is safekeeping. You can use a bank account to safekeep money, you have custodians who safekeep securities for you, and also the safekeeping capability banks are exposing as a service. Also this one is becoming commodified. As I said, when you have smart contracts you can use on the blockchain, then you also have this issuance capability. And an issuance capability is you can issue any kind of financial products with a smart contract. When you look at securities, for instance, then it's only a bundle of rights and obligations, and you can also now really depict financial products with the blockchain because the blockchain has an issuance capability. And I call it automated enforcement because it goes much further than automated execution. I mean, we were able to automatically execute processes for 20 or 30 years, but the enforcement involves also the fact that we can now literally pump money into the smart contracts. So before the blockchain, we always had the case we have a contract, and if some other party doesn't fulfill this contract, we go to a lawyer, we tell them, okay, you signed this contract, but now please help me with the enforcement, help me to get the money back. But with the automated enforcement, I cannot only display the contract in the blockchain, I can also really pump money into the contract. And this is why I'm getting rid of all the parties I need in case somebody's breaking a contract. So when we look at the financial services industry, we can see that especially those three capabilities banks are using are heavily becoming commodified by blockchain or DLT. And as I said, in the past 3 years, we did a lot of workshops with banks, we did a lot of prototypes as well. And here I want to present a real estate prototype, which we did with a bank, and it's actually now in the pilot phase, and it's going live in Q2 2019, where we try to look at the contract life cycle when we are having a lease. So let's say I'm new in Zurich, I want to go to Zurich, and now I want to go to a new apartment. And now first I fill out a questionnaire when I look at the apartment, then the real estate office has to select me as a tenant, and then all those things happen with the contracts. First I need a rental contract between the real estate office and the tenant, then I need a deposit contract between the bank and the tenant, then the bank has to open a blocked account, then I have to transfer money to this blocked account. So we have this process here, where we send transactions, we have to sign transactions with a lot of media breaks, and ideally this is a nice case to be displayed on the blockchain, because also later, after 2 years, when I leave the real estate, we have the handover of the real estate, we have a final invoice where we will have to assess whether there were damages in the apartment, and then at the end I get maybe the whole deposit back or maybe some part of the deposit. And I did an analysis on the current process, and as you can see here, we have high transaction costs. So the whole process along the whole real estate life cycle is bound with high transaction costs. So we have a lot of different parties involved. We have a lot of contracts. So as I said, the final invoice, the rental contract, the deposit contract. So we always have to print out the contract, send it to the party, sign it, countersign it, and I try to assess whether the process makes sense to be displayed on the blockchain. I first have to see how high are the transaction costs currently. Because if there's no pain in the process, then using blockchain doesn't make sense, because you can maybe add or increase the margin by 1%, but it would be better to find a process which has really high pain, high transaction costs, and to see whether we can improve this process by DLT. So I did this. So first, this is the result of the traditional real estate process. So from really seeing the real estate for the first time, over signing those contracts of the real estate, then staying there for 2 years, and then also moving out and getting the deficit back. So the whole contract life cycle is displayed here. We can see on the Excel sheet here that we have really high pain along the whole value chain of the process. And I derived some properties which helps you to assess whether I have high pains or high transaction costs or not, which is obviously the time, cost, and quality aspect of the process. The type, is the process analog or is it digital? The interaction, is the human-to-human interaction, human-to-machine interaction? How strong is the automation degree? Do I have media breaks in this process? And all of those properties helps you to assess whether I have high pains in the current process. And then when I assess the pain of the process, I can look at the first stage and say, okay, does DLT make sense in this case? So in order to find out the general DLT suitability, there are basically 2 questions. Are there different legal entities involved? And also is there an exit or transfer of value? And value is everything. So value is not just monetary value. Value is also having a contract, for instance, a bilateral contract. And as you have a lot of contracts here, different contracts in a lot of different parties, we can say, okay, it makes sense to use a DLT for this kind of process. Then we can go even further, because I just demonstrated you the 2 DLT archetypes. We have transaction-based DLTs and ledger-based DLTs. And we can now find out what kind of sub-DLT makes sense to be used here. And as I said, with transaction-based systems, you have the chance to also exchange sensitive information. Along this process makes sense to use a transaction-based DLT, so R3 Corda or IBM Fabric, because if you look at the rental contract and the deposit contract, it's full of sensitive information. I have master data of the tenant, I have master data of the bank, I have sensitive information about the deposit, my financial information, and I don't want those information to be publicly displayed. So with this tool, I was able to assess the current pain of the process, to assess whether DLT makes sense in the first place, and also to assess what kind of DLT I want to use for this process. And another important factor is that we have now here the fact that everybody's working with the same data. So we can have an object, and with a smart contract, we can lifecycle the objects. So when I first fill out the questionnaire, for instance, about my information, my address, where I'm working, what my salary is, I can use this questionnaire when the real estate officer says, okay, I want you to be my tenant, but I can convert this object into a rental contract and a deposit contract. And after the 2 years when I move out, I convert this object again into the final invoice. So while we had before a lot of fragmented information, everybody had copies of contracts, everybody now works with the same object. We can even lifecycle this object, which is also reducing transaction costs in the process. We did the assessment afterwards, so we built a prototype on Corda as well, because Corda was the best solution for this case. And as you can see here, we were able to radically decrease transaction costs along the whole process. You can see here that the handover of the real estate is still the process with the highest transaction costs, but being physically at the real estate and assessing physically whether there are damages, we can't really display this on the blockchain. That's why we have high transaction costs there. But especially when you sign contracts, because you don't have to print them anymore, send them anymore, especially in all those cases where you have contractual obligations, we were able to radically reduce those transaction costs. And those are some pictures of the prototype. As I said, it's actually now in the pilot phase. So we have now tenants in Zurich who have the contract on the blockchain, and it's also live. So you can see the questionnaire the tenant fills out. Then here on the real estate interface, you can see all the potential tenants. You can select now the tenant you want to, the potential tenant who you want to become the main tenant. And for the first time now, you sign with your private key the contract, and the tenant gets a public key pair. And then when you log in as a tenant, you see here the real estate contract and also the deposit contract between the bank and between the real estate office. And now you can sign the contract, and also the bank and respectively the real estate office can countersign a contract. And with this prototype, we have shown and also proven, which is not often the case, that we were able to reduce transaction costs within the real estate lifecycle process. When I think my time is over, I try to squeeze in as much information as possible. So the most important thing is that DLT and blockchain are different kind of things. there are really various DLT archetypes you can use. So transaction-based DLTs and ledger-based DLTs are totally different things you can use for totally different use cases. And the assessment framework was also able to show you that you can now really also justify why you use blockchain and how you use blockchain. And yeah, in case you have any further questions, you can contact me here, or when there are questions in the audience, I'm happy to answer them as well. Thank you.
Yes, we have like 3 minutes, 3-4 minutes for Q&A. So anyone? Then I have a question. How do you see in Switzerland, in Germany, how popular are developing solutions like this, and what's the industry that you see the biggest potential?
I mean, here for the first time here, we're about to go live with a Corda case in the real estate industry, and the thing is, when I do prototypes for products with banks, I directly involve the regulator into the projects, and I do not come with nothing. I come with working prototypes in order to show them what their role is. And I think Switzerland, especially because the crypto valley, is perfect for that because they're open to it. So if you come to them with a working solution and tell them how they can interact with you and how they can profit, then they're really open for innovation. And this is why it's in Europe one of the best places to be when it comes to blockchain regulation, because the regulators from different industries are actively involved within several projects. And I had the same experience in Germany as well, where we worked with some banks, Landesbank Baden-Württemberg, they had a case with syndicate loans. And the strategy is pretty simple. If you engage the lawmakers or the regulators proactively and come with something you already developed and show them how they can participate and show them what the benefits are, then they're much eager to join the journey than to tell them, okay, blockchain is a hype, please do something, please regulate it. And for me, the question was always about how you include them and how you participate with them. And yeah, the results are much better compared to, okay, you're the regulator, please do something. And yeah, I'm waiting here for you to publish some new regulations. And that's why it was really well in Switzerland.
Okay, and then apart from regulators, what's the biggest obstacle now that you see?
I think the biggest obstacle is the standardization, because now, as I've shown you, we have now Ethereum, we have EOS, Cardano for the public solutions, we have Corda and Fabric for the private solutions, and it's like this in every technology lifecycle. Technology always needs some time to mature. And right now, I'm part of the ISO 307 standardization group. Right now, standards are formed, and we do not know what kind of blockchain solution will prevail. And this is why we have so many different cryptocurrencies on the market, we have so many different protocols on the market, and by in the next 3 months, and maybe in the next 1 or 2 years, we will have standards, and industry can build on those standards. But I think then it's going to be too late. You have to now work with different kind of DLT protocols. You have to now gain the internal capabilities and resources in order to be ready. Because as soon as the regulator says, or as soon as ISO says, okay, that's the standard, people will just directly start to offer products, and you have to be prepared in advance. So you have to play around with different technologies, and you have to generate those capabilities now in order to be active as soon as standardization and regulation comes into place.
Okay, great. We're really happy to have you here virtually. Thank you very much, Ante. So, we have questions. No, you have questions. You see, it's always difficult in Poland.
Thank you. One quick question. My name is Bart. I represent GFT. We are a consulting company. So my question is connected with methodology you've used for the assessment. I mean, whether you used some out-of-the-box tool to assess the impact, the cost, and places where DLT can be implemented, or you have just mapped all the steps in the process and, you know, normally step-by-step analysis and assessing the or connecting the cost of every step. So I'm looking for any tool that we can use or methodology you've been using. Thank you.
That's the thing. I mean, first, it's you have 2 steps. First, you have to see how you connect the capabilities of blockchain to the pain points of the process. But then there's also, my methodology also has the part of redesign, because the initial process and the new process is totally different. You have a paradigm shift where we do not print out contracts and send them. Everybody's working with information. So as soon as you can assess the pain point in a traditional way with a traditional process, but then the methodology also includes the fact how you scope the prototype and how you redesign the processes, because the mechanisms how contracts are signed are totally different. And this is why, I mean, my dissertation will be out. I think I will have it in next week. And I'm happy to share the dissertation with you. There's some information about how methodologies look like to assess it, how you assess it in general. It will be public soon, and I'm happy to share it with you. It's really hard to answer this in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, the PhD dissertation.
But the redesigning is really important as well, because the methodology is totally different on blockchain and the traditional process. Sorry.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. It's not easy to summarize your 2 years' work in 2 sentences. So it's going to be available. I will send the copy after your permission to the group. And now I'd like to introduce you Tom Manai straight from Hong Kong. Thank you, Ante.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, you have full screen. Now it's Tom. Tom is solution architect for Asia Pacific for R3, and he will tell us what's going on in Asia, because as we know, it's one of the most developed areas in fintech. Hello, Tom. Can you hear us well?
Yes, I can hear you. Good evening from Hong Kong. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect. You can try your slides, because we see you perfectly. Yeah, excellent.
Excellent. All right, so again, good evening from Hong Kong. I'm here actually to speak at a conference tomorrow, Hong Kong Blockchain Summit, where I'm actually leading 2 panel discussions, one on blockchain in financial services and the other one, future of blockchain. Normally I'm based in Singapore, but happy to be talking with you guys today in Warsaw. I trust that the weather is probably better there than it is here at the moment. And as Wojciech just mentioned, what I'm going to do is offer up a perspective from what we're seeing primarily here in Asia Pacific. So this will actually be a relatively short presentation, but I will be talking over, or spending some time talking over some specific slides about some of the projects that we're working on here in Asia. Again, just to give you some background, I actually moved here to Singapore from New York City, where I was based for R3. And in fact, I had a very long career with IBM, mostly in middleware, some data management, some of their e-commerce software, which is what led me to payments, which in turn is what led me to blockchain. So I was working very early on with Hyperledger Fabric. I actually have a good understanding of Fabric, and I'm happy to throw Fabric under the bus for Corda customers. And also my contact information is up there. Please feel free to contact me directly through LinkedIn or follow my tweets on Twitter, etc. So the APAC landscape. First of all, we tend to think of it either by region or by economic development. And those approaches actually have implications for how we actually try to go to market with these kinds of technologies. So on the one hand, we can think regionally, normally would be grouped, Japan and or Korea are broken out. China tends to be grouped together for cultural and language reasons. India is its own separate entity. ASEAN we tend to group together because these are smaller countries, and also ANZ, Australia, New Zealand. But how the countries actually fare economically, obviously, is much different. So we can look at countries as being developed or developing, and again, how we approach them differ significantly. How we categorize the country, what our strategy is based on the particular market or the industry or vertical, and then also from a business cultural perspective. For example, what is their tolerance for budget and spending? What kind of regulatory processes do they have? How strong is the financial industry? How strong is compliance and security, etc.? So this, having come from the US, where I mostly worked with North American and a few EMEA customers, it's somewhat different here in Asia. Dealing with Japan, obviously, is much different from for example, dealing with Myanmar or Vietnam or the Philippines, for example. I borrowed this slide from a colleague who will be presenting on these topics to our internal management. So I thank Amit Ghosh, our COO here in Asia, for using these slides. But really, the thing I wanted to highlight here is that, again, each of these countries, while we'll tend to think of them holistically as Asia or APAC, really have completely different needs and really different interests in terms of what they're doing with technology in general, what they're doing with fintech, and what they're doing with blockchain very specifically. In some cases, again, you'll have developed countries like Singapore or Japan or Korea, where it's not so much a question of they're building out or optimizing existing processes or technologies so much as they're looking for new revenue streams, such as cryptocurrencies, for example. On the contrast, we have developing countries like Thailand or India who are looking at these emerging technologies as ways of leapfrogging over, say, 30, 40 years of financial and banking technologies. The parallel I like to draw is to cellular technology in mobile phones, in the sense that they were able to leap over landlines and go direct to cellular technology because it was much cheaper to erect a cell tower than it was to lay copper or fiber. And so I position blockchain technology as a way for developing countries and emerging economies to possibly do the same thing, which is a message that actually resonates quite well. So another slide that I brought from my colleague, more so to highlight, again, depending on which area of APAC you're talking about, what their interest level is in fintech, and also what they, what kind of business value they expect to see from that. So again, in some cases, it's going to be operational efficiency, but if I already have a fairly mature and well-established economic engine, such as a place like Singapore, they're not so much looking for operational efficiency as they are looking for new markets, new ways to innovate around those markets, and basically new channels for possible revenue streams. In contrast, countries like China and India are looking for things like operational efficiency, establishing new baselines, possibly new innovation, again, with the eye towards leaping over decades worth of existing technology. And then also maybe in some cases, disintermediating existing financial structures. So for example, we've had some countries discuss with us the possibility of, if we go with a blockchain-based technology, with a cryptocurrency, for example, or digitized cash, would this allow us to move off the dollar, for example? So you have some really interesting conversations with countries that are trying to figure out how they can leverage this kind of technology in order to accelerate the growth of that economy and the strength of that economy. So one of the interesting predictions I've seen recently is that Asia Pacific is going to lead blockchain and fintech development in the next couple of years. I think that's interesting both because, one, it surprised me, and it's suggesting that there was going to be very rapid growth amongst these countries. And I'm going to talk about some cases which actually suggest that, in fact, for better or worse, some of these countries are in fact being very aggressive and very confident in their approach to these technologies. So if their bets are proven to be correct, then again, they will have actually stepped out in front of a lot of the developed countries in terms of what they're doing with this. The other aspect to this is, in terms of global, Asia right now is seen as one of the cheaper places to do such business, in addition, I think, to Eastern Europe. So I can tell you that in these areas, they are working very, very hard to develop development shops that are very savvy with emerging technologies such as blockchains, cryptocurrencies, artificial intelligence, etc. Okay, so how is blockchain itself being utilized on a countrywide basis? So I'll delve into some very specific use cases. But I wanted to point out that from an R3 perspective, what we've been seeing is that it's really boiled down to a mostly three-horse race, as it were, between Ethereum, Hyperledger Fabric, and of course Corda. There are a couple other niche blockchains that have developed. Most notably, VeChain has garnered some traction for IoT sorts of use cases. But beyond that, it's mostly been variants of those three blockchains. So not surprisingly, when we encounter competitive situations, more often than not, we're either up against IBM, some other fabric implementation like Oracle blockchain or Huawei or Ping An. And then also consensus we see here and there. Although consensus for the time being has been limited mostly to consumer-oriented applications, so remittance payments, rural banking, banking the unbanked seems to be where Ethereum and consensus have made some inroads in some of the ASEAN countries. In the developed countries, it really boils down to ourselves and IBM, or again, some variant of Fabric. The other issue that I've noticed in this region, hard to tell if this is true in other regions as much, but the whole cryptocurrency and ICO situation over the past 2 years has really kind of confused the marketplace here. So that for a lot of people, they equate blockchain with ICO. And the first thing they'll ask us is, does Corda have a coin, and how can I purchase that coin at ground level? So you have to really educate some of the technologists here, some of the business leaders here, to separate blockchain as a solution from just various uses of cryptocurrencies and using ICOs to raise capital. Okay, so let's talk about some APAC specifics. Some of the strategic trends, observations that I've noticed from an R3 perspective is trade finance is probably the single largest use case here in APAC. Not surprisingly, given that almost everybody here is doing import-export, but nevertheless, we and IBM have both built up a number of our respective consortiums around trade finance and are very hotly contesting every trade finance opportunity that is floating around the Asia region. In contrast, around elsewhere in the world, insurance has been very big for R3, and essentially we've taken quite a bit of business away from IBM in the insurance space. For whatever reason, insurance in APAC has been much slower to respond. It's not that they are going with other technologies so much as they seem to be very conservative and very much taking a wait-and-see attitude. So I do encourage them to look at what some of the other consortiums are doing around the world. But nevertheless, it's been a slower growth for us. In sharp contrast to that, what has really emerged behind trade finance as a major market for us is capital markets and digital assets. So over the past 6 months, 8 months or so, R3 has made a concerted effort to kind of build out our strategy around tokenized and digitized assets. Basically borrowing from the Ethereum and ICO playbook, but really focusing on true business use cases besides just raising capital via ICOs. And I'll talk a bit about some of those use cases that have resonated with clients here. But I think also we've benefited mightily from the R3 consortium in the sense that we've been approached by a number of clients who've said, we would have originally have built this on Ethereum or something like Stellar, except that we really want to buy into your ecosystem and leverage some of the relationships you have. So this has actually proven to be pretty strong with us. And I think over the next couple weeks to months, you're going to hear a number of announcements coming out of R3 and some of the folks we are working with in this space around the world. And then there's some other, what I would say, tertiary use cases such as KYC, payments, real estate, loyalty points, etc. So I have examples of use cases around those particular solution areas, but they're not quite as big as, I would say, trade finance or capital markets. For each country, in order, I'll speed through this because I'm running out of time a little bit, but each country, again, kind of has their own personality when it comes to looking at these technologies. So for example, I've noticed that Singapore does an awful lot of high-profile experiments, and the most famous one is Ruben. It's public, anybody can look it up, download the source code, read the report, etc. But then they don't actually do any implementations, interestingly enough. So they like to do a lot of hand waving and receive a lot of press, but they aren't implementing a whole lot. There are a number of startups in Singapore that are doing blockchain, but it mostly seems to be around
what we can do. No. Sometimes innovation breaks down. And we are not Microsoft. Low. Kind of almost in time. So no Q&A session. No? I'm really sorry for this happened, but we are happy to hear Tom anyway. If nothing will change, then we move to Jacek Malinowski. One of the first global rollout of blockchain solution, which is blockchain for media, and this is one of the projects. So we keep our fingers crossed always for them. So plug in your, and I will just forward claps and thank you from you to Tom after the meetup. Yeah. So, Jacek.
I think let's switch to this.
Then Piotr.
Hello everybody, we'll start in seconds, I hope. Just looking to connect my computer to show you my slides. And to keep you entertainment, I can say that I'm Cais Manai. I work in IT space for 15 years already. I don't know, I look younger than I am. And for over 10 years I ran a software house. And I'm going to give a presentation about one of our products. Okay, so let's go. So the product is called Blockchain for Media, but before I will fast forward to the product itself, I want to give you a little bit story about myself and my company. I already started explaining that we are 10 years on the market, and back in 2017 we wanted to build our place in the US market. So we wanted to break into the US market. We already had a lot of clients in Europe, and we are strong here with different technologies, especially in custom software development. But we needed to, to scale up and just be present in the US. So what we tried to do, we tried to do a lot of internet advertising, different types, display ads, video ads, we tried a lot of platforms. Basically, we were burning out thousands of dollars monthly with very little conversion, with very little outcome of the situation. So first of all, we thought, okay, maybe we do something wrong because we are not the experts on the field. So we tried different campaigns, different filters, different type of audience, and we were burning a lot of money during the process. And unfortunately, it didn't pay off. So then we changed our approach to more to B2B and direct communication, and fortunately we made it to the US. And And during the trip, we attended to a lot of meetups, a lot of meetings with people, and we even hosted our meetup about the blockchain. It was early 2018, and we wanted to sense the knowledge about blockchain in the US market, because at the time in Europe it was very little. So we were shocked how the people are, of course they knew about Bitcoin because it was booming at the time, but they knew about the blockchain technology, that this is like ledger, it's immutable, and it's easy to cooperate thanks to this platform. So for us it was a pretty big shock that they were aware of the technology. So it was easy for us to explain, because we usually work B2B, it was easy for us to explain how distributed ledger technology can be applied to almost any industry. So even if a firm is interested in building a blockchain platform, and at the very beginning they will start with the platform which will be run only by them. So first of all, we ask them question, do you want to integrate in the future with other entities? If yes, then distributed ledger technology is for you. Because usually, of course, all the firms aren't islands. They need to communicate, they need to cooperate, especially now in the internet time. So sooner or later, they have to exchange some information, some assets, or even they have to cooperate on the same software. And using the regular, let's say, technology, this is kind of difficult, maybe not in technical way, but there is lack of trust between parties, especially if they don't know each other and they don't have a good experience yet. So blockchain technology gives this opportunity to build consortium out of the box. So for them it was very interesting, and we sensed that okay, the US market is good for us, and we have to build some product for them, some service. And we met our American business partner. She has extensive experience in marketing industry. She was responsible for running campaigns for the biggest agencies, the biggest brands in the world, and he was head of marketing. So I shared my experience about how we burned a lot of money during the process of getting into the US market. And she said, yes, so this is like a common problem, and she's aware of this problem like for 10 years already, and nobody is doing too much about that. Of course, there are some firms trying to tackle the problem, but unfortunately, it's not resolved yet. So we sat down, we've done the brainstorm that, okay, so we have to fusion our IT experience with her knowledge about the media space, and we want to just set up a startup, a product, which will help in this media industry. So what we do, we started with American Dream style, and we attended to Entrepreneur Magazine's elevator pitch show, and investors from this show, like real investors who invest in real estate, in proper firms, were very interested in the blockchain space at the time. As I said, it was a very good time in the US because it was hot topic, still is hot topic, the topic is booming. So basically they invested in our idea because we have a very good experience in IT and also in the media space. So they believe that we can deliver the product which might be like another unicorn. So this is our business partner over there. So I have a little time, so I will just go forward, and I will explain how the media buying work. How does the media buying work? So basically, I thought that it should be very easy. So as I want to, for example, display my ad, so I will send it to this publisher, and everybody is happy, right? But in fact, it's not that easy. I don't know how you're familiar with this space, but I will try to explain it with our graph, which is, I hope, easy to understand. So we start here. There is a brand which wants to just display their ad somewhere in the internet, right? So usually they use an advertiser and there is list of parties involved in the process. And even this is more complicated than on this chart. There is like multiple list of ad exchanges on the way, demand side platform, supply side platform, etc. And at the very end, an ads land on a website. And at this point, brand has no clue about all the way the ad just made. They have no clue, and I would say they might not care if this ad is displayed on a website when a human being is reading content. So there is just this opportunity that the human being will see the ad and somehow he will react to the ad and will be converted for a client, etc. But unfortunately, what happens, there is a lot of bots, automated processes, spiders, and a lot of fraudulent practices involved in the process. So a lot of money is burned because automated processes who display websites with ads. So there is no option that a human being will see the ad. So that's why a lot of traffic goes just away. So the money is like throwaway, and that's why my money was burned out, and I had very little conversion as well. So this is a list of problems which is unfortunately in the programmatic ad buying space. So there are fake inventory, there's domain spoofing, bots and automated processes, there's ad viewability problem, there's a lot of ads hidden one below another, and there is lack of transparency. And transparency is the keyword for our solution, and the keyword how we can solve the problem, and in fact it's the keyword of blockchain itself. Because what's the problem? The problem is that advertisers, people who spend the money, they have no clue when the money went and when the money was spent, and there's very little information. Even when I wanted to investigate what I'm doing wrong, why I don't have conversion, I was, receiving only the invoice and some general information that was, for example, like 10,000 impressions, and that's it. And I'm paying like thousands of dollars for that, and big brands are paying millions of dollars annually for advertising, and they don't have too much information, public information. So what we invented, the idea was pretty simple, that we want to have a piece of software which follows with the ad finally to the website, and then we can verify the audience. So this is the most important thing. If we can verify that there is a human being at the very end, then we can say, okay, this at least have a chance to be seen by a human being. We use a lot of techniques for the verification. There is like fingerprint verification, technical analysts, IP range analysts, but our killer feature is that we have machine learning involved, and we detect patterns of bots operating on the website or human beings. So there's a lot of high tech involved, in fact, to determine if there is a human being on the other side of this wire. And once we have everything verified, we store the information on the blockchain ledger. And why blockchain ledger? Of course, you know that it's an immutable ledger, and it's very easy to join in consortium. So pretty much that's why this is verified, and our product already works with the current ecosystem, but we are looking ahead, and in our vision, we want to integrate deeper with the parties which are on the way. So that's why when we use the blockchain technology, it's the easiest way to communicate and to stay synced with other parties involved in the system. Okay, so blockchain firmware up and running. So yes, we are up and running, and we have a lot of underneath the engine of our product, but we have to display the data to the client, to brand, or to advertiser, so they can have some use of this data, right? So we have detailed dashboard. This is just a snapshot of some functionalities. So this is an example of overview of 4.5 million ads verified for our system. There is information about invalid traffic. We have information about both humans, active humans, and we have information about interaction with an ad. We can break down the data into daily information. So, for example, here is data from one day. There is breakdown on hours, information about the audience. But during the implementation, we also thought, okay, so this is the audience is one thing, but we also have the ability to measure viability of an ad. So we wanted to add as many features of the verification as needed for advertisers, so they can make better use of their money. So here is information about viewability. We are in IAP Tech Lab, so we have the latest news about the best practices of measurement and best practices of how the ads should be displayed on pages, about how long an ad should be displayed to be valid, etc., etc. So this everything is written in the guidelines, and we just present the data, but this is overview data. But usually advertisers work on campaign levels, they add some publishers, they add also negative publishers. So our system integrates with the demand side platform, and we have the ability to check the data which are on the advertiser side, so the amount of impressions they pay with the amount of impressions we collected in the real world. And we gather all the information about the invalid traffic, about the amount of humans. We break down data also for different publishers, so it's easy for them to optimize the campaign with our software, and just basically win more clients, have a better conversion, and basically make better use of the brand's money. Okay, so this is the roadmap. I started with our story, and to just give you an idea how blockchain project can be built. So we started in January in New York City with a list of meetings and brainstorming about the idea, what is feasible at the time. And in March, we already secured funding from the Entrepreneur magazine, who are still part of the product, our product, and they are updated with the progress, and they are very happy that we are doing very well. And then we started the development process and MVP and tests, which are already in the books, and we verified during the test phase more than 10 million other impressions. And in fact, in the media buying space, this is not a lot. This is like just a teaser. So we are now in a rollout mode. We have a sales team, and we are focusing on the US clients, and also we have a lot of inquiries from the Asia market, because they have very big problem with bots and automated process which just burn out the money. But this wouldn't be possible without our award-winning team. We have certified blockchain developers. We are Corda partner. We have more than 10 years of experience of implementing custom software. So for us, it was very easy to jump into blockchain space and just to use our experience on that field. And this also wouldn't be possible without Corda, which is our partner and helps us a lot. So Muni from Japan helps us to schedule a lot of meetings with potential clients. We communicate with the UK headquarters, and so from the very beginning we had support about our solution and the technical support, and then we have the business development support. So I'm very glad that we have chosen Corda for our product. Okay, and what are next steps? Because we have very big plans, and we hope that this year is going to be skyrocketing for us. So yeah, as I said, we are in a rollout mode now, and we are gathering clients and prospects from all over the world. So if somebody is interested in this kind of project, which might help in ad media buying process for brands or for advertisers, we'll be really happy to show you how it works, to give you a teaser, to show you a demo, even to do some test run with you, so you can see the real data, your data, how it looks like, how the audience you gather looks, and yes, so you can ask me. I will be here around. And also, there are two developers from our company. So if somebody is interested in technical details, so they are there, and they're both Corda certified developers with already great experience under their belts. So we'll be here around. And if you're interested in more our projects, then you can jump in on Hobnob Pro. There is our account. There's also more information about blockchain for media. And at the very end, I will leave you with the list of founders of our product. And if you have any question, I'm here, so hit me up.
Hi, I'm Peter from Bank, and I want to ask, because it's all about blockchain, the project, and the project is cool. I mean, it's needed in these days because there's so many bots and viewers that do ads, and people get revenue for bot traffic on sites. So, but I don't really understand the purpose of blockchain.
Yes, of course. So maybe I will jump back to the okay. I will try to be loud. Sorry for that. So let me jump to two slides of my presentation. Okay, so sorry for that, but we'll be back on track shortly. Okay. This one, right? So even if we start with the idea, which seems to be closed, which seems to be that they might be only for one entity, in fact, if we see potential that it might be connected with other parties, it's very wise to consider blockchain itself. So this is the initial idea, and I will jump to this part, right? Okay, so our technology, it's above, let's say, and you can consider brand and publisher as different nodes of the blockchain, and there are other parties on the way. So it's not that we are only storing the information in the database and saying, okay, it's blockchain, so it's better. It's not that, because we are also connecting different parties which don't speak to each other for now. Right now, like brand has no clue about the publisher. They just give money to advertiser, and they keep their fingers crossed that they have some conversion. Okay.
So it's all about transparency, right?
Yes. Okay. Another question?
Maybe you are. In which way you manage the conflict of interest between the publisher and advertiser?
Okay, very good question. Yes, but it's a very good question, because there might be conflict, even at the very beginning, between brand and advertiser, because since we are going to stop some traffic, there will be the advertiser might think there is the less budget for the advertising. But in fact, it doesn't work this way, because if brand has, for example, 5 million for advertising, the budget is fixed, and there is no money back for the brand. So what the brand's looking for is conversion, new clients, they want to sell more products, they want to have bigger revenue, so they don't care about 5 million. They just want to use it wisely. So if advertisers use it wisely and use our software, then they can reuse half of the money or some part which would be fraudulent, and then they can bring value to the brand. So advertiser becomes a hero of the field, and other brands might want to cooperate with advertiser because this advertiser performs better than others. So this is how we fix this conflict, which would be the first one. And about publishers, also we fixed that problem. So thanks on the data we gathered, we see that the legit publishers have very good traffic. So they don't have to be afraid. And there is a list of smaller, I don't say smaller, just fraudulent publishers, or there is the problem is maybe in fact not in real publishers, but in domain spoofing and in fake websites. We just pretend that, for example, they are newspaper on a newspaper website. So there is no conflict, I would say, because big websites, big publishers have good traffic, and thanks to this solution, once we stop the traffic to these bad publishers and to these fraudulent institutions which should be out of the game completely, there is bigger traffic for publishers, so they have bigger revenue. So everybody who does a good job will win in this solution.
How do you convince publisher that he should not be paid for 20% of his traffic as you think that it is a bot traffic? How do you convince them that it is really a fraudulent traffic, not a real traffic that they should be paid for?
Okay, so yeah, this is also a very good question. So first of all, what we do, we gather the statistics, and for now, what would we advise? It's choosing publishers wisely, and then we can eliminate these underperforming publishers, so they won't have any former traffic. And of course, we can start dispute. We can take the data from the blockchain ledger and try to get some money back. It happens. But what's much better is just to think about the future and how we can optimize, how we can use the budget money better. For example, with different publishers, if a publisher is underperforming. But as I said, like the legit publishers, they perform, they have good quality traffic, so we won't get any money back from them. Yes?
Why Corda?
Okay, why Corda? I have a hidden slide about that, really. So hold on, I will be there in a minute. We are in progress. And here it is. Okay, so this is very bad quality, that's why it was like in the very end, but I thought that might be this kind of question. So, as you probably know, because a lot of people from Corda are talking about that loudly, so in fact this is distributed ledger technology, which doesn't spread the whole ledger to each node. So in this example, we have advertiser 1, 2, and 3. And there is some traffic between first advertiser and first publisher, and about third advertiser and first publisher. And in this communication, the second advertiser is not included. So it means that there is no traffic wasted to send the data to second publisher, and even he shouldn't know about this transaction, right? Because it's not connected anyhow to him. So that's why Corda. And Corda, it was designed for the finance, so the amount of transactions was the key point for the technology itself. That's why we have chosen the Corda, and because of this kind of implementation of distributed ledger technology.
What exactly do you transfer for that?
Okay, so what's the asset, right? Yeah. Okay, so asset, it's like the single display of an app. This is the asset. And then we store the information about the quality of the viewer, let's say. So this is our viewer token. So every single display of an app matters, and we store information about every single display of an app.
In this case, isn't 20,000 transactions per second a bit
Oh,
low?
yeah, so yeah, of course, the topic about amount of transaction is a very big topic, and we managed to do that because our system is, one is the blockchain ledger, and second part of that is the whole backend system which do the verification, and thanks to that we can connect a lot of let's say the list of ad views. We can connect in one list, and we can then upload that during one Corda transaction. Everything is saved because it was done underneath our whole solution. But the transaction which goes to the Corda, it's one which gathers a lot of data inside. So there are our blockchain experts who can provide you with more details, but it's how we manage that. And that's why we can scale the product to very big amount of transactions and pages. Another questions? Yes.
Yes. How do you adapt to the new, the changes in the method of cheating? Because
okay, very good question. Yes, of course. So
because all the time they are changing.
Yes, it's true. It's true. So I will tell you our secret sauce, which is kind of obvious. So, okay, I will do that really. So you have a lot of different types of fraudulent actions. You have domain spoofing, you have fake inventories. But what happens at the very end, how fraudulent activities win the money? They have bots which goes through these fraudulent websites, right? So once we verify a real human being which doesn't appear in the fraudulent system, right? Then we know that this is legit display of an ad. So the key idea is that we verify the audience, and once we verify audience as human, then it's the place we want to be.
Okay. But so you're not I don't know, playing bad cop versus thief or something like this?
Well, of course, this is a part of our job.
Yeah, because the techniques are changing all the time.
Exactly. Yes, this is the part of our job. So I said that we also do the fingerprint verification. So I can give an example about that, and it evolves all the time. So we have to keep up because, like half a year ago, there was some technical parameters in fingerprint which determinate that okay, this is a bot because of some parameters which only appear there and not in any real browser. And after some time, they've seen that okay, somebody spotted that, so they had to adopt it. And then we are, investigating fingerprints for other parameters. But still, the best solution is to, at the very end, verify human being at the second end of the wire. Oh, my time is up. So thank you very much, and I will be around.
It's time to say goodbye. So Tomek, maybe. Yeah. From my side, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you for coming to Bank today. So I hope you learned something. Let's meet again on another meetup next week actually, on Wednesday. We will meet up on different use cases of blockchain, and Piotrek from our blockchain team will also talk about his project that he developed during the hackathon, ETH Denver hackathon that he went to 2 weeks ago. So you're invited if you want to join. So thank you very much.